Welcome to today's video. It's been an exciting week with a lot of solutions and exciting new ideas coming up. For today, we're going to look at an issue that I've wanted to fix for a long time. Thanks to somebody sharing a video on YouTube, I was able to get a really good solution for this issue. And the issue is when you're playing live on the keyboard into Cubase, and it's something emotional, or it's when you're playing live and you don't want to play to a click track. So it's not just a 4/4. You're playing with emotion, you're playing with your own timing, and that's what makes it special. And you don't want to kill it by having a click track trying to, you're trying to play to a boxed kind of click, and it just doesn't work. So I found that that was a real issue where I could come up with some interesting piano pieces, but the issue then became, how do you take that timing of that idea and actually build a song out of it, because it's not matched to any grid where you would build a song to it or with it. And that's quite an issue. So to demonstrate that, I've got this little piano piece that I just played into Cubase, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about here. So here we have the piece, just a single piano track. All right, so the issue is to get it on grid. As you can see, if I change it to quarter notes, you can see a little clearer that these notes are not in time whatsoever. And if I reset it and turn on the audio track, or the click track, you can also hear it. Completely off the grid right now, but it has it's nice. It has a flow and a melody of its own, which I want to retain. I don't want to destroy it by just moving it severely onto a grid, which will kill the initial feeling. So you might say to yourself, well, 41 fingers, that's not an issue. This is all Midi. Just set the grid to, maybe eighth notes, and you can see where some of the notes are off. Why don't you just grab a note and move it slightly onto the grid there, and, it's not a big issue. Or just grab the quantize tab and have it all quantized to, even if you just quantize it to 32, and, there's no big... Just quantize it up. It's just MIDI notes, right? Well, of course, I've tried everything on those lines, but I'll show you what happens. You'll hear it, actually. So I've just moved a few of these notes to, not even very much. Let's go back to eighth notes here. And the same thing will happen if you try to quantize it. And let's just... get a few of these notes just close to where, the timing is somewhat better. All right, now I'll just do it for a couple of the initial bars here. All right, so these three bars, I kind of moved these notes to be on an eighth grid, okay? So you're thinking, okay, that should work pretty good. You might have to do some adjustments, but listen to what happens. And we'll turn off the click track just to make it very clear. Just listen how it completely destroyed it. So it doesn't even come close to working. And like I said, you can try small quantizing, iterative quantize. None of it will work. It will just destroy the piece. And the reason is because when you first create a piece and all the notes are in time with each other, as soon as you move one note radically without taking in context all the notes around it, you've just made a terrible mistake because that timing is now off without any compensation of any of the notes around it. So that creates a big issue. And really, if you just move a couple notes, 32 part of a note, it will really destroy your timing. And so how would you do this and still retain that flow? And there's a real simple solution, and we'll do that. I'll show you that next. Okay, we're right back to where we started with all the notes where they were originally, right? So how can we do this? How can we fix this to the grid? As you know, with audio, you can use a button like this audio warp button up here in Cubase, and that will move audio events in time relative to the grid. Well, we want a solution for MIDI notes in a similar fashion, and there is one. It's this button right over here. So it's the time warp grid button here. So let's just take a look at that. Let's drag this down here, and let's drag our track out a lot bigger so we can see it very clear, and make it maybe a little bit wider. We want to make sure we get maximum view on it here. That should work. Now, when I turn this button on here, it'll ask to turn on the tempo grid. And if I try to warp now, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and what it's going to basically do is, you see where these notes aren't lined up to the grid, like this note right here? All you have to do is hover over these bars here, the grid, and I have it set up to 8th note right now, which is good because with my music, the live piano playing, I don't need it to be strict to a quarter note. Even if I can get it to an 8th note, that's plenty good to be able to start building elements onto that. So you don't want to move your notes more than you have to. And with an 8th grid, that will allow me to add new material in time to this idea, but it won't cause me to move my notes too radically. So I find 8th note is good. Now just take a bar and move it, and you see how it moves time like that. So move it to your first note, and so that first beat there, the first that note on the piano, and you may have to redo the first one, but you're starting to move notes in time relative to one another, which is the key here. And it can be done really quick. Just move this in time, and notice I'm not making radical movements, and they don't have to be perfect. In fact, I don't want them perfectly on the line, because you want to still keep your human feel, but you want to be able to use it on a grid. So I'm not interested in zooming in super fine to have it right on the grid. In fact, I just by eye at this, zoom level is fine. I just want to get this a little bit of fine tuning, and so I move this over like that. And remember, you need to have a tempo map open while you're doing this, and you can see the changes on your tempo map as you're doing it. It'll ask you to turn on your tempo track before you make these warp additions, right? So, yeah, and you just make these fine movements like that. And if one, relatively affects another, just go back and fine tune it. But you'll find it works really well, very easy to do. And they just you put them into the timing that you want. Now, this is kind of a big movement here, but I'll discuss how we can fine tune that a little better there. But so generally, you want to move your beats, your notes onto the grid just by moving. Very simple to do. They really have a nice setup here. So it's much easier than audio warping even. It just works really nice. And so I'm almost done already. In fact, just a couple here. And for the first run, that looks really good. All my piano notes that I played are pretty much on the grid. And just go back and check, make sure that none are too far off. Here it's a little bit off. That's fine. I'm going to leave that for a human feel. These notes here, maybe a little bit of adjustment there. The biggest radical move we did was with one of these notes here. And if I look at my tempo map now, because these points are put in automatically as you made those warps. These are put in automatically. So I can see this was a radical move, taking it from my bass beats per minute was about, I recorded it with a Cubase tempo of 100, but if I look at my actual playing, if you were to draw a straight line through it, it's probably at about 105, 107. So these radical moves now, I can take these points and tone them down a bit. Just make sure you keep them on the line where they, so tone it down so it's not so radical. And you want to keep it straight to a center of your mean tempo or your average tempo kind of beats per minute. So you want to stay away from very radical movements. In fact, I'll probably take all of these down a little bit like that. So overall, this is good. The movements aren't too radical, and it gives me some human feel in there. Okay, so now let's get that out of the way and see how our warps have changed if we need to readjust. And we see that things are still looking pretty good. A little bit changed there, but still within tolerance if it's sounding good. And here we made an adjustment, and we'll just adjust that a little bit more back to where it was. But overall, things are looking really good. So now we're going to play it, and you're going to hear the change, and you're going to see it on the grid. All right, so now the Cubase grid should have adapted to the new custom grid. And let's see if it has retained the original groove that I played in. So you can hear that it really has adhered to the grid, and all the musical idea is still retained, which is excellent. Really, it's almost like magic. So let's take this back and turn on the audio click just to make sure. And it is nicely on the grid, and I still really enjoy the original idea. It's still there. It hasn't been warped into something that I didn't intend. So initially we started with a groove, and then we adapted Cubase, its grid to our groove. And the way we did this was we first you create a tempo track, and we did, and then you activate it, you turn it on. And let's just go to its interface here. And so it creates the new grid with all these data points. And you can see those data points up there. And of course, how we did all of this was just using this button here, the time warp and warp grid button. Now, since that works so nicely, it makes sense that now that we have this custom grid, anything Midi that we drag into it should adhere to the grid if it's in musical mode. So this track is in musical mode, and I just, it's the same piano. And let's drag in a scalar performance, just the first one here, and a couple bars of it, a few chords. We drag that into the track right underneath. And this, and if we zoom in a little closer, all these new MIDI notes are adhering to our new custom grid. this isn't by accident. It's because we have musical mode turned on, and these notes will adhere to what is now the new cue-based grid, right? And so if we play it, it may not musically sound too great because these are just any generic notes, but they are played in time with our original groove now. And that's exactly what we wanted. So a big thank you to the fellow who put up this YouTube. It was very helpful. It really solves an issue that I've been dealing with. And I'll put a link to his channel in the description of this video. And there are some great ideas I'm working on now, some exciting things. So hopefully I'll have some new videos out shortly. Hope you had a chance to create music wherever you're at in the world today, and we shall see you on the next one.